Hello, my name is Ernest Rajacone. I'm a U.S. Advocacy Officer for Pearl. I'm here today to talk to you a little bit about House Resolution 413. House Resolution 413 was introduced by Representative Deborah Ross of North Carolina on May 18th of this year. HRS 413 recognizes 12 years since the end of the armed conflict in Sri Lanka, speaks to the atrocities committed by the Sri Lankan state and the ongoing deterioration of human rights on the island, and commends the bravery of the Tamil community, particularly the families of the disappeared, in their continued quest for justice. The resolution urges the U.S. to work with the UN to help establish a credible international accountability mechanism for the grave crimes committed in Sri Lanka's armed conflict. It calls for a permanent political solution to address the root causes of the armed conflict, and calls for a meaningful international justice and accountability process for mass atrocities committed by the Sri quest for justice. The resolution urges the U.S. to work with the UN to help establish a credible international accountability mechanism for the grave crimes committed in Sri Lanka's armed conflict. It calls for a permanent political solution to address the root causes of the armed conflict, and calls for a meaningful international justice and accountability process for mass atrocities committed by the Sri Lankan state. As Sri Lanka continues to lurch towards authoritarianism, HRS 413 emphasizes, at a critical time, the importance of human rights, democratic principles, and the basic rights of civil society in U.S. engagement with Sri Lanka. The resolution has bipartisan support, with 18 co-sponsors to date. I encourage you all to reach out to your congresspeople and ask them to co-sponsor House Resolution 413. Continued support for this legislation is one critical aspect of broader U.S. advocacy efforts on behalf of justice and accountability for the Tamil people of Sri Lanka. Not only that, but congressional officers are most likely to listen to their own constituents, so raising this concern with your representation actually has a tremendous amount of impact. If you would need advice or help setting a meeting with your congressional representation, or if you would want sample language in any correspondence that you would have with your congressional representation or your congressional office, or if you have any questions broadly about what that process looks like or about HRS 413, please feel free to reach out through FETNA. They can connect you with me or one of the other individuals who might be able to assist you in this broader advocacy effort around House Resolution 413. As the Tamil American community, it is heartening to see House Resolution 413 get introduced this year. It marks an important step, but there's still a lot of work to be done regarding the U.S. engagement with Sri Lanka and how that affects the continued call by the Tamil community for justice, accountability, and self-determination. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Arabi and I am the Advocacy Lead and UK Senior Advocacy Officer at Pearl. And today I'll be covering Pearl's advocacy highlights for the past year for our teams in Canada, the UK and at the UN Human Rights Council. Overall, our advocacy team has had great engagement with policymakers this year. The Canadian advocacy team organised a successful briefing event for MPs from all parties on ongoing human rights issues in Sri Lanka, and they conducted a Black July memorial event with MPP Jagmeet Singh. Pearl's policy recommendations were also read out by MP Helena Jaksic at the House of Commons. This year, the Canada team also organised and oversaw the 2021 Tamil Struggle reading group online, which saw a high turnout and an incredibly engaged cohort. Our UN advocacy team has also been very successful in numerous ways. The team had been actively engaged at the UN Human Rights Council, pushing for a stronger resolution. The team also organised a virtual side event at the UN Human Rights Council on pursuing accountability for mass atrocities. The team also delivered an oral statement at the Council after the High Commissioner's report and briefed missions on the situation in Sri Lanka and the importance of having a strong mechanism in Resolution 46.1. Finally, in the United Kingdom, there has been active engagement with MP officers and senior management within political parties. We have helped to organise and participated in cross-party conferences organised by the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Tamils on justice and accountability in Sri Lanka. We have spoken as part of a panel on human rights in Sri Lanka at the 2021 Labour Conference. The advocacy team will continue to engage with policymakers on present and upcoming issues, and as ever, make sure that the needs of the Tamil community in Sri Lanka are at the forefront of everything that we do. Thank you very much.
Hi everyone, my name is Archana Ravichandradeva and I am Executive Director of Pearl. I am very pleased to share Pearl's accomplishments with all of you today and to connect with the broader group of Tamil activists who are involved in this work. As many of you may know, I took on the role of Executive Director from Tasha Manoranjan, our founder, and someone who led Pearl for over 16 years and has now taken on a role in our board. I often tell Tasha that I don't think it's possible for me to actually fill in her shoes, just given the decades of activism, wisdom, and engagement that she's had in this important work. However, I'm really looking forward to building on what she's done and to make my own contributions as well. Before starting this role as executive director, I was Canada's senior advocacy officer for Pearl. And of course, we're looking forward to strengthening our advocacy efforts, which my colleague Arby will be speaking further about in this video. Pearl looks forward to furthering our voice within the broader struggle for justice, accountability, and self-determination for Tamils, and engaging with different stakeholders in different countries in which we work to further our strategic goals. We are also working to expand and engage our work in research, advocacy, and legal venues, and to strengthen our own internal processes and protocols to ensure we are transparent, efficient, and a progressive voice internationally and within our own organization. I am so proud to lead this passionate, engaged, woman-led, progressive organization. And I look forward to building my connections with all of you as well and within the broader community.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sibi Gnanasundaram. We are starting this cast-based informational for everybody who's listening in from Fetna. I think we can go around. We have a panel here. We're just going to talk about a few issues about cast. I'll say an intro, but before the intro, everybody can introduce themselves.
Hi, Vanakkam. My name is Madhavi, and I just finished my third year of medical school, and I'm doing my master's in public health at George Washington University. And I'm originally from Maryland, and currently I'm in the DC area.
Vanakkam, I'm Bharti Caldwell. I am a senior in college. I'm a business administration major, minoring in psychology at the University of Texas of Dallas, and I've been in Dallas all my life.
Vanakkam, I'm Inial. I'm a high school senior from Harford County, Maryland, and I've always lived in Maryland.
Vanakkam, my name is Aditya. I'm from the University of Minnesota, Duluth, and yeah, I've lived in Minnesota all my life.
And I'm Sibi Gnanasundaram, like I said before. I am from Maryland. I graduated from Virginia Tech, studying finance, and I work in venture capital. To get started, I'm going to do a little bit of background about why we're holding this informational, and then we're going to go into questions. With the recent lawsuit by the state of California against Cisco Systems, as well as accusations of caste-based discrimination by the BAPS organization in the US, and subsequent federal inquiries, we at FETNA thought it would be best to have a short talk about caste-based discrimination in the US. While we may not be very familiar with caste-based discrimination as first and second generation Indian Americans, most of us Indian Americans and Sri Lankan Americans clearly carry the privilege of being oblivious of it. To preface the talk, I just want to say this is informal and we do not have any experts, nor do we have many experts in the US in general. The folks at Equality Labs do great work, and I highly recommend visiting their website and reading their reports. Just to give an overview of why we don't have experts, Tamil Nadu has about 20% of its population as Dalits and Adivasis, but they're estimated to only be around 1.5% in the US. Most of the Indians and Americans are from dominant or upper caste and come from some level of privilege. We're going to start with a few questions. I'm going to start it with, what is caste and what is caste-based privilege?
So I guess I can start. So I guess I define caste by the quote by Dr. Ambedkar, which is an artificial chopping off of the population into fixed and definite units, each one prevented from fusing one another through the custom of endogamy. So I guess in my own words, I'd label that as graded inequality, as in you can't mix within caste, which is why the caste system is so strong, because you have this caste pride and your ability to be within your community and feel safe within that community. And for me, caste privilege, I look at it in three ways. The first way is having connections and opportunities and like almost guaranteed jobs if you're from India, or even if you're from an upper caste or middle caste community here in America. Second way is the ability to live without fear, as in you don't have to fear somebody asking for your last name and then being looked down upon, or having to worry about, oh, if I use this person's utensil or that person's utensil, that I'll get yelled at. And then the final way is the ability to unsee caste, as in you can just live your life without ever having to worry about, where you're from or who your family is. And also the ability to just, how do I say this, be able to just fight back if anybody says anything against your caste or says something about you, they're from a lower caste. The ability to just fight back and not have to worry about consequences. So
All right, if that's it, we're going to move on to the next question. Do you guys think that there is caste-based discrimination in the US?
So I think there's actually been quite a long history of caste-based discrimination in the US. So beginning all the way with the Immigration Act of 1924, which actually first introduced the first challenges to Indian immigrant citizenship in America. And unfortunately, the arguments of Indian immigrants at that time were firmly rooted in caste. Famously, the first cases were brought up by A.K. Mazumdar and Bhagat Singh Thind, both of whom argued that they passed the whiteness test because they identified themselves as, quote, high caste Hindu of full Indian blood. So they explained that because of their upper caste and pure Aryan blood, that those racial origins were something that they historically shared with Caucasians, making them deserving of American citizenship. And in fact, it is this exact racialized perception of caste, anti-Dalitness, anti-Adivasiness, that then sets the stage for anti-Blackness within our South Asian American community. Throughout South Asian immigrant history, we find several instances of upper caste South Asians being eager to associate themselves with whiteness and dissociate themselves from Blackness. And this even includes famously Gandhi, who considered himself to be upper caste and was famously anti-Black during his time as an immigrant in South Africa.
Yeah, so to just add on a little bit about that, I definitely think there is still caste-based discrimination in the United States. While discrimination is like not as direct as seen in our history, I would say, we see it through various forms, such as like the marriage marketing system that we have in our society today. So many parents still emphasize the importance of wanting to get married within a caste, and so the specific community's legacy is built upon. So personally, this is like mind blowing to me because we're like in the 21st century, and to some extent, like wanting to marry like the same race or ethnicity is kind of frowned upon in a way. So taking that to a whole new level of like wanting to get married to a particular caste is just like mind blowing, I would say. And we see this in so many forms, like there are like certain caste gatherings and such that happen, and at these caste gatherings that happen, people are scouting out individuals to get married to. So it's just all in all like very, I think, disappointing that this is still going on. But yeah.
I think that leads us to our next question, which is, do you think it is only prevalent in the immigrant community, or do you think some level of the caste-based discrimination has been passed to the next generation as well? I think marriage is one of the first points, but do you guys see any other areas where it's been passed on?
Yeah, so I think within our generation, especially, I have noticed that we carry forward a lot of microaggressions. So slight snubs that, implicitly suggest that you don't belong here, or that, you are not welcome here. And just some examples that I've heard of and seen, especially within the college community, is people saying that they would not room with someone who is of a lower caste, or even more subtle things like not being willing to use the same utensils or dishes as someone who they deem as lower caste. And for anyone that knows, that is, textbook untouchability. That is actually what is deemed as illegal in the Indian constitution and considered to be untouchability. And it's quite astonishing to me that people have decided to carry that across the ocean here and continue to do that. And I think to a certain extent, there are people within our generation who don't fully understand that what they're doing is actually untouchability. But, if you are unwilling to share, utensils that have been washed and cleaned in a dishwasher, or plates that have been washed and cleaned in a dishwasher, and you're not willing to share that with someone, that is a form of untouchability.
I think also to add on to that, there's a lot of times, I think, as a second generation immigrant or first generation immigrant, it's easy to say, oh, my parents, this is something my parents carried with them, but it doesn't really matter to me. But I think like a big discussion with caste, it comes down to, in my life, has been within the South Indian classical world, in the Carnatic music world. In the States, we have a lot of South Asian kids who train in dance and music. And we have things like the Cleveland Tyagaraja Aradhana, which often from the outside seem like beautiful celebrations of culture, but deep down inside, they're very, very organized ways of perpetuating caste privilege. And I think, I'm Sri Lankan Tamil, and so I kind of always fly under the radar. But even kids my age, they're so used to, kids in their music class, kids in their programs, kids who win the competitions, who get to perform in certain situations, being of higher caste or the same caste as them. I've sat in rooms where I've silently agreed with everyone, being like, yes, I'm also vegetarian. Yes, my parents also do this, because people simply were just not aware that I didn't have parents who were of the same caste or of the same standing that theirs were. And it kind of is passed on. And even though they don't explicitly understand it as bias or privilege, it definitely plays a big role in kids my age and, the forward, I guess, progress of South Indian classical dance and music in America. There's big discussions about people who win and who get promoted by those programs as well. It's not rid, and people who are of lower caste don't always get the same opportunity and are not seen the same way, and often have to do twice as much work in order to be promoted and seen as valid by mainstream audience.
I think to add on, we also see some of these microaggressions, as Madhavi said earlier, in even things like the media by people that were born in America. As an example, Padma Lakshmi and Aziz go on a trip to India, and they go to South India, and they say that most of South India, most of Tamil Nadu is vegetarian, which is just, and Aziz agrees with her, it's just not true. Most of Tamil Nadu is non-vegetarian. So just small microaggressions like that, you hear that all the time. Oh, most Tamil people are vegetarian. But even on top of that, most people would say Tamil people don't eat pork, or Tamil people don't eat beef, and that's not true either. People that we know, or people that are dominant caste, might not eat pork or beef, but it's actually relatively common to eat pork, for instance, by Hindus, and even beef by Hindus. So we see small things like this by every community that would definitely feel like a microaggression to other communities that feel like they can't say, I eat pork, or I eat beef, or I eat meat. So that's just another thing that you see even in the media. Moving on, some people think that colorism is also connected to caste-based discrimination. Do you think that that is a form of caste discrimination happening without our knowledge?
So I think colorism is a big discussion, especially in India. People have had campaigns against Fair and Lovely and all these different things that basically, are outright ways of, promoting fair skin. But I think colorism and casteism cannot exist without one another. And I think, like, in my experience, again, growing up in America, whether I realized it or not, a lot of the media that I consumed growing up, whether it be Tamil movies or, all these different things that I consumed in efforts of connecting with my culture, people were portrayed, lower caste people were always portrayed by darker skinned individuals. And so inadvertently, even though I don't intentionally carry that bias, there is a very, very deep connection between, darker skin and lower caste. And because colorism is so entrenched in our culture, in our society, both just perpetuate one another. So when we see someone of darker skin and lower caste, two things that often lead to disadvantage. And so, yeah, that's kind of my experience with that as well.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely to like add on to that, I can kind of give a personal example. So I do have parents that are different castes. So one of them is seen to have a lighter skin tone associated with their caste, and one of them is not. So whenever I did visit India, like as when I was younger and all of that, like I would have cousins or individuals or family just point out, oh, you are like darker, you have a darker skin tone that might not be really associated with the caste of your mother or your father. So just having that like microaggression to you be placed as a child is like very hard to understand. And it took me a while to understand what was even going on and that it was even caste related. But like Inyo said, that colorism and caste systems like coordinate very like are very interdependent in a way. Like I have literally experienced that hand on hand. And even here, like when you randomly have a discussion of with your friends of like caste, or if it's brought up, they're like, oh wait, you're part of this caste, well you don't look like you're part of this caste because you're not this skin tone. So it's really disappointing that again this is still something so prevalent that we have to talk about. But yeah.
All right, moving on. Tamil Nadu has generally been on the forefront of the caste struggle. Do you think our parents' generation have generally upheld that in the US, or have you been disappointed in our community?
I guess I would say I'm disappointed in the community. I guess the parents that I've seen, people that I've been around at least. I guess for me, I guess a personal example would be that I know during the 2017 Minneapolis FedNow, so if I'm from Minnesota, so obviously I was involved in, doing a lot of organizing, this and that. And we had tried to bring an author who had written a book about a simple like caste love story. And then what happened when we had announced that this author would be coming, there was a large outroar from the FedNow community talking about you can't bring this guy, talk this and that. And it wasn't even a fact of the author or anything bad about the cast or anything like that. It was really just a fact of caste pride, or I guess in Tamil how my dad would say it is Saudi Vedi. I guess that's how my dad would say it. And I guess that was the first real example for me in showing that just because I'm in America doesn't mean I can avoid or just like close my ears when I hear caste or even look at it. So that's, I guess, what started my whole, I guess, reading into and understanding how can I help in the caste struggle.
I think, yes, on one side, while there are, a lot of Tamil parents and the older generation that continues to disappoint us in such ways, and, continue to host, Jadi Sangam Kutams or, caste gatherings and things that, frankly, I think in our generation, I hope that we will continue to look down upon and that that's not part of our value systems, that that's not what we're taught. But at the same time, I will say that I think credit goes to Tande Periyar, that, Tamil people do continue to be at the forefront of the caste struggle, whether that's within India or here. I know that from my personal experience, whenever I am talking about caste, whether that's in person at college or on Facebook in a public forum, the people who are ready to like stand by me are very often Tamil people. And it's because they grew up in households as well, where, Tande Periyar was talked about, Sliya Mariyade was talked about. And so these are concepts that, were constantly in the back of their minds. And so when there is a time when we see something is wrong, then we're more willing to be like, but that's not right. That is not okay. And I've had several friends from whose parents are from other states have even said, oh my gosh, is caste like that big of a deal in Tamil Nadu? Because they don't come from homes where that's talked about at all. For them, it's like, oh, I thought caste was something that was done and, it was history. It's no longer happens. But, it continues to happen even here in America. And we explained all those examples. And, when you bring it up to them, they're like, oh, wait, wow, like I didn't even know that that's happening. And so I hope that, we continue to have this conversation amongst our community and with others outside of our community as well.
I will add that the aggressiveness of non-Tamils on caste is kind of ridiculous. They're outright casteist, and they will even ask you your caste a lot of times. They will ask you if you're North Indian, are you not from this area? You're light skinned. Why are you from South India? Why are you Tamil? And stuff like that. So from that sense, I'm glad to be Tamil. We are significantly more progressive in that sense, but we do have, people in Tamil Nadu still come here and then they switch back to caste names as last names. That's still happening, still quite prevalent. It happens in every caste except for Dalits and Adivasis. So there is a sense of othering there, regardless. But these are great points. I feel like we've progressed in some ways, we've regressed in some ways, but I think overall it's been, the Tamil community have been pretty progressive.
And just one point about the last names, to be honest, sorry, I just wanted to add that you mentioned Adivasis and Dalits don't, and what you kind of talked about before, they can't. They do not have the privilege of keeping the last name that they want.
Of course, yeah. They can't own it still because of then violence still in America. Some colleges have outlawed caste discrimination. UC Davis, Brandeis, Colby College in Maine. Do you think more colleges and universities need to do it?
So I think the two examples that Sibiana actually mentioned as inspiration for our discussion today with the Cisco Systems lawsuit in Silicon Valley and then the BAPS issue, both kind of serve as examples where casteism and caste discrimination have leaked into the professional world for Indian and South Asian Americans. And I think, like, from my perspective, caste has always been a discussion between my parents and maybe people at Tamil class or Tamil Sangam or something. And so it's kind of appalling to see it be appear in like a professional setting. And I think it serves as an example of Asian Americans or South Asian Americans, allowing their bias, their casteism to leak again into their decisions. And I think when we have such concrete examples of that, and we're aware of how prevalent it is. We just had a discussion about how prevalent it is still in our communities. It is important to ensure that that doesn't affect somebody's chances at an education. We kind of talked about the disadvantage that, having a low caste has in India when it comes to pursuit of education, pursuit of jobs. It would be the worst thing to allow that to also occur in America. Once you make it America and you still have an issue being a lower caste person, having to get a job, having to get into college. And so, in efforts of stopping that from happening, I think it's best to create policy that makes sure that that doesn't affect someone's decision or someone's future in terms of education or a job.
Do you guys think that any other steps should be taken as well, in addition to colleges?
I guess in addition to colleges, I guess having conversations with your friends about what they think, or if they don't know about it, or at least help them educate or give them resources to learn by themselves. I guess talking with their parents to understand things, and also involving yourself in whether your college's Indian Student Association or their student councils, and talk about having them bring up caste in their own organization so they can, I guess, give a more outward view of caste to people who don't even know what caste is or think that it's some outdated system that doesn't affect Indians anymore.
Yeah, to basically add on to what Aditya said, it's basically just informing yourself and educating yourself on the topic itself. So you're forming your own individualized like perspective on the topic and not just carrying whatever you heard from your parents or whatever their ideas or values or perceptions are. Like it's basically creating your own um, idea on this topic. So really just going out of your way to educate yourself, read about it, learn about it, have those discussions. I think that's really important.
Yeah, along those lines, I also just really believe that change begins at home. And so if there are things going on in your home that you don't agree with, whether it's something your parents say, whether it's something your relatives say, I know it's hard. Oftentimes, it's much easier to talk about these issues outside than it is within our own homes. But I really think that that is where change starts. And even if it's difficult, it's being able to sum up the courage together to have these discussions, these difficult discussions.
So within the double movie industry, we've seen a lot of cast-based movies recently. J Beam is one of them. We've seen Karnan, Asuran, Pariyerum Perumalum. Do you guys think that the movie industry has generally avoided the issue, or has the Tamil movie industry taken it head on?
Well, I think Malavika is going to kind of talk about like the beauty of these movies and the opportunity that it serves for these communities. But I think like one thing to note is in the Tamil movie industry, in the Indian movie industry, we've seen historically, maybe J-Beam has some beauty in its explicit discussion about caste, but there have been movies about underrepresented people, marginalized people, women, village people, farmers, all these different things have been touched on. And I think one thing that happens, especially as Americans who are watching these movies, is this feeling of satisfaction almost from watching the movie, because you walk out feeling like, oh, I'm aware of the situation. And oftentimes these movies end in a happier light, and a lot of people, so I've seen it in my parents and my family friends, walking out of theater being like, oh, that's such a terrible issue and it's so sad that happened, but it doesn't really spark any motivation to change. And same thing happens in India. The mainstream Indian audience does watch these movies, but they walk right by the things that are happening. And to touch on specifically caste, like for example, recent movie discussed the Irula community, which you might find some solace in the fact that took place 25 years ago in 1995, but those people didn't make it out of India. Majority of Indian Americans, South Asian Americans are of higher caste. And so those problems still exist. Those people are still undocumented. They still don't have ballots. They still don't have representation. And so all of those things are, while it is, as Madhavika is going to talk about, like important to portray those voices in mainstream media, it's not exactly the full solution. And like Aditya and Bharati talked about, there are important steps that we need to take to educate ourselves and try to inspire change.
Yes, completely agree with what Iniel said. It's about what we do when we leave the theaters after seeing these movies, right? That really matter. But I do think that it is very, I think for a long time in Indian cinema overall and in Tamil cinema, there was not very much room for these stories. And even if these stories were shared, they were shared by other upper caste people shedding light on these, unique stories. But I think for the first time, really, I have to say the first time ever, you see directors who are coming from these communities and being able to strongly, share their stories. I mean, Karnan is by no means, a story where it's just like, I'm going to talk about this lightly. Like he really goes for it. And so, and these are movies that are not just, critically acclaimed, but they're commercially successful movies. And I think that's really important. That it means that the audience is welcoming these movies, and so I hope more and more directors and producers and actors and actresses from these communities rise up. And I do also want to say that after J-Beam, actually, one good thing, Iniel, you mentioned the Irula community, Irular community. The chief minister of Tamil Nadu actually, Stalin actually gave pattas, which are land certificates, to 33 Irula families after the movie J Beam release. So I mean, again, tip of the iceberg, long way to go. But these movies are having at least a little bit of a stone and ripple effect. Yeah.
And just to add on, we've been getting more and more of these stories, and we're getting better representation amongst the Dalit and Adivasi community, but they're still highly underrepresented within the film industry, within the media, within most things. Even if people want to make it seem like, no, they have reservations, they're getting to all these positions, they don't. Most of the powerful positions are not, maybe politics, but outside of that, not really. Do you guys have any recommendations for resources for people that are listening in right now? Where to learn more?
So I think like one thing we've been doing it throughout our discussion is the comparison between some of the race struggles that we have here in the States and the caste issues that we have in South India. And I think a big part of hearing the story, I mean, even today, we're having this discussion, but we're not people who've, truly experienced it firsthand. And so, you have to invite people to your resources, expose yourself to people who've experienced these things firsthand. And so like, I remember last year, I heard an NPR, like a little informational session that included a speaker named Suraj Yangda, who is a Dalit who from India made it to the States, got an education, got a PhD from Harvard, and now he serves as a scholar on caste at Harvard. And, he publishes and he takes his time to speak on things. And people like that who have, the academic background and who've done, their research and their work, who can also speak on their experiences, I feel like are kind of the best sources to go to when it comes to like really personalizing these things and figuring out, how it might even appear in your own community.
And I guess to add, there's this book that I read that helped me kind of understand the caste struggle a lot in terms of that when growing up, we only learned about the African-American struggle in like high school, even in college almost. So there's this book called Caste by Isabel Wilkerson, and she's like an African-American author, and the book was on the Oprah's book club, I think 2020. And it just illustrates how the African-American struggle is so similar to the Dalit struggle or the lower caste struggle. I mean, with things like in Dalit Panthers, which really resembles, the Black Panthers a lot. So I guess this book really helps kids who are in high school or in college or just starting to learn about caste. I think it's the best resource as a book, at least, to understand the struggle.
And to add on, I think going and checking out the Equality Labs and their website, they have a lot of they're the only group that does any research on caste in America and North America. They have a lot of harrowing statistics about actually what Dalit and Adivasi people go through in America and the type of discrimination that they face, including the violence that they face in America. Highly recommend that. I would also recommend Annihilation of Caste by Ambedkar. Great book, based obviously in India, but it gives a really good perspective of how they both broke through originally to get the beginning of some version of freedom. I think with that, if everybody is done, I think that's the end of this conversation. I want to thank everybody for their viewpoints and everything. Very insightful. And I want to thank everybody for listening in. Thanks.
தொடர்வது மரப திங்கள் பற்றிய நிகழ்ச்சி.
அனைவருக்கும் வணக்கம். 2022 ஜனவரி மாதத்தை தமிழ் மரபு திங்களாக அறிவித்தல். வட அமெரிக்கா முழுவதும் தமிழர்கள் பல்வேறு மாநிலங்களில் சங்கங்களும் தமிழ் அமைப்புகளும் அமைத்து தமிழர் பெருமைகளை உலகறியும் வண்ணம் பல்வேறு புதிய செயல்களை செய்து கொண்டிருக்கின்றோம் நாம் அனைவரும். நமது தமிழ் மரபையும் பண்பாட்டையும் உலகறிய செய்வதற்கு தமிழர் திருநாளை ஒவ்வொரு ஜனவரி மாதமும் நாம் கொண்டாடுகின்றோம். இதனை மேலும் பெருமை செய்யும் வண்ணம் வருகின்ற 2022 ஜனவரி மாதத்தை தமிழ் மரபு திங்கள் என அறிவிக்குமாறு ஒவ்வொரு மாநில அரசுக்கும் அந்தந்த தமிழ்ச் சங்கங்கள் கோரிக்கை வைக்கலாம். இந்த கோரிக்கை ஏற்கப்பட்டால் மாநில அரசுகள் 2022 ஜனவரி மாதம் அனைவருக்கும் வணக்கம். 2022 ஜனவரி மாதத்தை தமிழ் மரபு திங்களாக அறிவித்தல். வட அமெரிக்கா முழுவதும் தமிழர்கள் பல்வேறு மாநிலங்களில் வியாபித்திருக்கிறார்கள். ஒவ்வொரு மாநிலத்திலும் தமிழ்ச் சங்கங்களும் தமிழ் அமைப்புகளும் அமைத்து தமிழர் பெருமைகளை உலகறியும் வண்ணம் பல்வேறு புதிய செயல்களை செய்து கொண்டிருக்கின்றோம் நாம் அனைவரும். நமது தமிழ் மரபையும் பண்பாட்டையும் உலகறிய செய்வதற்கு தமிழர் திருநாளை ஒவ்வொரு ஜனவரி மாதமும் நாம் கொண்டாடுகின்றோம். இதனை மேலும் பெருமை செய்யும் வண்ணம் வருகின்ற 2022 ஜனவரி மாதத்தை தமிழ் மரபு திங்கள் என